If you're watching this video, it's probably because you've started learning Power Apps and Power Automate. You've probably even started building your first app or your first flow. Congratulations, you found two of the best tools for low-code and no-code development that are available in the cloud today. My name is Paul Stork, and I'm going to try and help you by producing a workshop with SharePoint Fest that deals with some of the common issues that people run into when they start using Power Apps and Power Automate. I spend a lot of time each day out on the Power Platform forum. And over the last couple of years, I've seen some of the common issues that come up time and time again as people begin to start working with Power Apps and Power Automate. In my workshop, we're going to take a look at a lot of those common issues that people face. We're going to talk about what causes them, about what the underlying conditions are, and most importantly, we'll talk about the available workarounds that will get you over that hump as you're building your first Power App or Power Automate flow. Here are some of the things that we're going to be dealing with in those two half-day sessions. The first half-day session will focus primarily on Power Apps. We're going to start off by looking at one of the most common problems that people face when working with Power Apps. That problem is called delegation. People are under the assumption that Power Apps is not a scalable platform because there's a limit of only 500 records by default that you can retrieve into a Power App. The problem is you can actually have much larger data sources. You simply can't access more than a certain number of records at a time. The process for working with those large data sources is called delegation. There are some functions in Power Apps that are delegable, and there are some functions in Power Apps that are not delegable. And which functions are which varies depending on what your data source is. So it gets to be very confusing. We're going to take a look at each of the common data sources that people use. We'll outline which functions exactly are delegable and which ones are not, which operators in those functions are delegable, and most importantly, what are the strategies for using delegation to be able to access really large lists when working with Power Apps. Once you've learned how to work with your data source in Power Apps, the second problem that I often run into is the problem of handling dates in Power Apps and Power Automate. To make it short, one of the problems is dates are always stored as both a date and a time. And that makes it very difficult when it comes time to compare one date to another. It's very common that people want to go out and say, I want to look only at records that are dated for this day. Unfortunately, those records are dated for this day down to the millisecond within a 24-hour period. So using operators like equals is almost impossible. There's also a problem because Power Apps and Power Automate were written to be international applications. And as we move from one space to another in the world, we find different time zones. So if I'm in the United Kingdom and I enter a record and I set it for a particular date and time, and I'm looking at it instead in the United States, sometimes the time looks off and sometimes the very date looks off because of the shift in the time zone. So we'll take a look at how dates and times work and what are some strategies for working with dates and time, particularly if you're working in an international environment. And again, this all varies based on the data source that you are using. The third thing that we'll look at that is very common in Power Apps is that I want to change the look and feel of the application based on data that's being entered or data that is being retrieved from a data source. So we're going to look at some of the strategies involved when I want my application to react to the data that's being retrieved or the data that's being input by the user. Look at how to do conditional formatting, how to do data validation, and how to literally prevent users from inputting data that doesn't match what we're looking for. And finally, to round out that first day, we'll start taking a look at Power Automate and how it can be used to extend the concept of Power Apps. How do I invoke a flow from a Power Apps button? How do I pass data into it? And how do I retrieve results back out again so that I can display them in my Power App? On day 2, in our second half-day session, we're going to focus primarily on Power Automate. And again, we will start out with one of the most common problems that we run into in Power Automate. And that is, how do I and when do I need to do looping within Power Automate? One of the advantages of writing a flow is the ability to apply it to a set of data over and over again. And that always requires looping. But often loops develop when I don't think there should be one. And there's also the problem of how do I loop now and exit later? We'll take a look at all of those issues and how to work around them. We'll then revisit the concept of working with large data sources in Power Automate. Unlike Power Apps, Power Automate does not have the concept of delegation. It has a similar concept called paging. Paging is not automatic, so we'll take a look at how to turn it on and what effect it has to your Power Automate flow. The third thing that we'll take a look at is how do we use conditional elements? How do we decide what the flow is going to do based on the data that we are processing? When is it right to use a conditional if statement? When is it better to use a switch? What are the limits on how many if statements or how many switches we can do? And what are the workarounds if I need more than those? And then finally, we'll finish up by looking at how we implement error checking and how we do troubleshooting, both for Power Automate and for Power Apps. By the time we're done with these 2 half-day sessions, you'll be prepared to go out and write your first Power App and your first Power Automate flow. It doesn't mean that there'll never be issues in the future. It doesn't mean that you won't sometimes struggle with things. But you will learn what the workarounds are for the common issues that people run into. If you run into an uncommon issue, then I invite you to post it on the Power Platform forum. And I'll keep an eye out for it there and try to help you through it at that point. I hope you'll join me for my workshop on Power Apps and Power Automate as we explore some of the common issues that people run into and how to work around them. See you then.